Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. This is episode 25, where we're going to be discussing Herzog's 1999 film, My Best Fiend. And with me here today, as always, is the wonderful, magnificent, extraordinary Cullen McFader. What's going on?
I am not magnificent. I am the essence of God.
Exactly. Everybody out there, just as a heads up, Cullen and I are going to do this episode here today. I'll be playing Herzog. Cullen's going to be playing Kinski, and we're going to mirror that violent, turbulent relationship.
Watch out for the profanities I'd be using.
No. But in all reality, it's funny to think what it might have been like, the two of them in a room together. But we're going to be discussing this film, My Best Fiend, and it is about the working relationship between Herzog and Klaus Kinski. They made 5 films together over the course of their working relationship, some of which are considered, probably, I think most people would agree, some of Herzog's greatest films. We have Gary, Wrath of God in 72, Nosferatu the Vampire in 78, Wojciech in 78, Fitzcarraldo in 82, one of my personal favorites, and Cobra Verde in 87. They worked a lot together, and I think their working relationship is, the stories have reached epic proportions, right? Mm-hmm. This profoundly turbulent, violent, threatening each other's lives, but then, in the next breath, making extraordinary movie magic together. I mean,
and claiming that each other were, brilliant in their own right.
Right. It was brilliant insane. One moment.
It was like a married couple. Like it was a weird,
but
weird
the
kinda...
worst extreme. Thank God I'm not that way with my wife. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to handle that, But in the sense that there's this love hate, this extreme passion between the two of them, and it's a really interesting topic to discuss. And this is why Herzog decided to make a film about it. Because it's a creative relationship, it's a metaphor for the creative process. There's a lot of great things going on here, so we'll jump right in. But before we do, I do want to give a little bit of background to who Klaus Kinski was. It's a German actor. Probably most of you out there listening have some idea of who this is. And it's not to say that this film is at all like a biographical film. It's not.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Not at all. But it probably helps to have a little bit of background. I found this to be interesting, at least, just to have some context. And he was a controversial figure, and we're going to briefly talk about that, too, to give context for all the other things that we discuss about Kinski as it relates to Herzog's representation of him in this film. But I didn't know this. Did you know that at 17 years of age, he was conscripted into the paratrooper unit for the Luftwaffe?
I had no idea.
I had at 17, apparently, and this is, like almost everything in his life, it's like what was manufactured, what was actually real. He claims to have deserted, but we don't know if this is true. But his second day of combat, he was captured by the British. He actually
this is 1943, just for context, so well into the war.
Near the end of the war. And he was actually captured by the British, and I think he ended up spending, a year plus some time as a POW by being held by the British. But that's actually where he began acting, from what I can understand, which is pretty interesting. And
in prison it says,
And I had read too that in 1950 he had actually did a stint in a psychiatric hospital. And that I guess there was a theatrical sponsor, but some kind of peer or teacher or mentor. He actually tried to strangle her. I'd never heard this story before, but that he was actually given like a preliminary diagnosis of schizophrenia. So I don't know if that's, if that's actually something he suffered from. But I mean, it kind of gives you a little bit of context that, he was definitely, and we'll get to this in this film, he was definitely off kilter.
And I wonder if that was a result of the combat, or if that was something that was
or being
hereditary
a POW
or what. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that was extremely stressful to be conscripted into the German army, the Nazis in World War II, to be captured, to be To have to spend time in a prison camp, that could not have been fun, to say the least, of course, not to make light of that. But then, even more seriously, though, and I did not know this until not too long ago, and Colin, you didn't, I think, know that until today. But
Hmm.
in 2013, his daughter actually printed or published an autobiography, and she claimed that Kinski had sexually abused her
Hmm.
when she was younger.
From 5 to
So,
19, yeah.
which is obviously horrific. And
Hmm.
so, Herzog did not know about this when his film was released in '99. I actually looked and I couldn't find any, and it doesn't mean there isn't any, but I could not find any public statements of Herzog's about this
Hmm.
after this information was available. I haven't seen any comments, so I don't know if he's ever publicly commented. But it's important, I think, to kind of have this context. I think a lot of people, it's a challenging situation. A lot of people see him as a gifted actor, but I think it's important to kind of represent the fullness of who he might have been. So I just thought
Hmm.
that would be kind of an interesting thing to kind of present to people. But let's jump into the movie then. It's like we said, it's not a biographical film. I really think that this movie is more about Herzog
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
than
I
it
mean,
is
that was one
about
of the first
Kinski.
things that I mentioned when we were just kind of having a
Right.
preliminary chat was that it seems like, I mean, A, Herzog is definitely probably on screen for this more than any of the other documentaries, I would
Yeah.
argue. And B, it seems like Herzog almost took a step back from like full on directing scenes and
Mm,
allowed his crew to have more kind of freedom with how they chose to shoot it so that he would, because of the fact that he was a subject of this movie as well,
right.
that he would almost kind of eliminate that bias to shoot. But there are moments in this that we'll get into, where there is definitely this moment, because of course Kinski is not alive at the time of making this movie,
Hmm.
where you kind of have Herzog's word against Kinski's, and Herzog, of course, has the last word. And it's really interesting to see moments like that where there's certainly things that they disagree on.
Yeah.
There's moments, and I mean like moments of historical accuracy between the two of them, where they give different accounts. And of course, the ones that we hear in this movie are of course Herzog's.
Yeah.
It's almost like a lawyer or a judge kind of acquitting themselves from um,
It's an
a
interesting way to look at
case,
it. Yeah.
because there's like a personal bias involved. But
Well,
but again, there is certainly still that perhaps unconscious bias in the movie.
right.
Um,
Well, I think it's certainly Herzog's perspective
yes, yeah,
on it. It's Herzog's perspective that's kind of that definitely involves Kinski and their relationship, but and obviously, and we have Herzog talking a lot about his relationship with Kinski. We have Herzog telling us story after story. We're going to get into some of those specifically. And clearly, Herzog is a master storyteller. And we
yeah.
already know this behind the camera, right? But when you look at Herzog in this film, I mean, there are uninterrupted takes that are 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes long, right? Single cuts where, I mean, he's masterfully telling these stories. And I don't know if
Vivid detail, yeah.
vivid detail, and they're totally compelling. It's
And
totally
the funniest thing is that
captivating.
when he tells these stories, he's captivating even the people that were there. Like you'll
Right.
watch some stories where he's telling stories sitting beside or standing with the people that
Yes.
were actually present,
Yeah.
and they almost. But it also, to me, makes me wonder again what is factually true in this movie and what is kind of the more
Always.
exaggerated truth, because
Always.
I
Yeah.
almost feel like a lot of the times when those people that were there kind of listening to Herzog tell this story, perhaps they're thinking in their head like, well, I don't quite remember it that way, but and
Hey.
like there's kind of a funny expression on some people's faces sometimes, which is really interesting to me because again, we've discussed numerous times in this podcast the idea of, what is true may not be what is factual,
And what
and
is
I feel it's like
factual doesn't
especially
necessarily.
in
Yeah.
storytelling.
Right. And we
So
know that, Herzog is much more, I mean, he is overwhelmingly concerned with, an ecstatic truth, as he would call it, as opposed to
yeah,
an accountant's facts.
yeah,
So I almost always, I go into all of Herzog's films fully recognizing that, he's a storyteller. He tells stories to effect. I'm almost certain that he's exaggerating. He's,
hmm,
kind of compiling and synthesizing, and he's, I do think he's genuinely shooting for what he believes
Yeah.
the real heart of the truth of the thing to be, as opposed to what would have been an objective truth. And it's interesting. And it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned this right off the bat. Kinski's not here. He died. When did he die? I think it was 91. So he, he died 8 years before the making of this film. So although Herzog is using footage of Kinski, of course, he is the one in the driver's seat. He gets to pick the footage that he's choosing the footage. But to be fair, I mean, I think he shows Kinski at some of his worst, at least the worst as it was known at that time.
And caught on camera.
Caught on camera. And right, of course. And then he also has people speak to him in really glowing, positive ways. He brings Eva Madison, Claudia Cardinale, 2 actresses in 2 different films that worked with Kinski. And I mean, and they just gush about what a kind, actor, a kind, generous, warm, vulnerable, thoughtful person he was, in addition to being an extraordinary actor. So, but Herzog ends the film even in an extremely, I would say a bittersweet moment. I don't know if but definitely admits that there was more than one side to Kinski, and admits that there's more than one side to himself. And this is where, we know that Herzog loves to play with metaphor. And I think that, like many artists, if not maybe most or all, see the world through this lens of symbol, right? That everything could be a symbol or a metaphor for something else. And, we hear Herzog talk about this constantly. Whether it's Fitzcarraldo and the ship over the mountain, I mean, the reason that these things are important to him is because they're metaphors for something. And I really feel like that's how he's approaching Kinski here, not so much as a human being, but he's processing what this relationship symbolized to him, and maybe even how was Kinski a mirror, or how did Kinski reflect him, Herzog back to himself,
affect his work too,
and affect his work, right? And so those things are what I find so fascinating, right? I mean, obviously, the personalities are extremely interesting, and it would be an interesting subject just to have a biographical story about Kinski, but that's not at all what's happening here.
Well, and in line with that, one of the funny parts, speaking of biographies about Kinski, is that Kinski wrote an autobiography, but in this, Herzog claims that it was wildly inaccurate. Again,
and I would love to, and what would Kinski say about this film? Which is, that's kind of the joke, I guess, is that, I'm sure that Kinski's book was dramatic, completely dramatized, but of course, so is Herzog's film.
So is this. Likely so is this, yeah.
But that's a good point, and just to take it further, one of the things I thought was so interesting about that scene that you're talking about. So in the film, there is a moment where Herzog actually has Kinski's biography, or autobiography, actually, I think. And Herzog's talking about, kind of recanting the story about how Kinski was, that Herzog actually helped Kinski come up with some of these derogatory terms. They actually broke out a thesaurus, and Herzog was, you should say I'm this, you should say I'm that. Let's really, crank this up. And Kinski said, well, hey, I have to say that it was something bad, right? Because that's what sells books. I have to say something bad. And Herzog's like, yeah, I know. Let me help you. And then Herzog goes on to kind of, he looks through the book and he thinks about it, and he's like, well, Kinski was clearly obsessed with me. He mentions me page after page after page. And it's just interesting to me because certainly Herzog, I mean, I've got to imagine that he's a very self-aware person on some levels. He may not be introspective or kind of always analyzing himself. I know that he kind of talks against that, about really self-conscious self-analyzation. But you've got to think that he's aware when he's like making a movie about Kinski, and he's talking about Kinski being obsessed with him. You've got to think like Herzog knows he's obsessed with Kinski too, right?
Exactly. Well, that's what I mean when I say that perhaps a more apt description is like an old divorced couple who are still in love with each other, but just were too toxic of a relationship to ever stay together, because it's like they're constantly talking about each other. Yeah. And it's this other thing where it's like they're constantly saying, "Oh, I don't like him. I don't like this about him. I don't like that about him. This was crazy. This was a lie. Blah blah blah." And then they kind of break down to it, and it's like, Yeah, but I love them. Like, it's this
Right.
funny thing where, and then especially when they get together, you
Yeah.
see moments where they haven't seen each other for years, and then they get together and they're talking and they embrace, but they still kind of have this like almost
This
game
edge.
like,
It's an edge. Yeah. It's
yeah,
like a competitive kind of edge.
yeah,
Sure.
it's like a
Sure.
one-upsmanship contest. It's really interesting. Um, And there's so many. There's some things in here that we found hilarious in this movie that Herzog intentionally chose to put in,
Yeah.
but that kind of go against a lot of the things that Herzog has said. And one of those things is there's a moment in this movie. It's not a big moment, but it's something
Yeah.
that we both caught.
Which one
There's
you're
a
going to.
moment in this movie where they show footage from Fitzcarraldo of
Ah.
the ship.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes. Let's set this up. Set this up.
so Herzog has gone on record a lot of times saying that
Yep.
everything in Fitzcarraldo is real. There's not a single special effect in it. There's
Yep.
not a single
Yep.
everything that you see was really done. The ship going down the river and breaking against the bank and all that.
Yeah.
It was a full-size ship all the time. And it certainly was a full-size ship that they sent down.
No
but
question.
there's this one shot that we found in this movie
In
that
this
both
film.
of us separately
Yep.
just came across and kind of made a mental note of. Where it's very clearly a miniature. It's filmed
Yes.
very much obviously in slow motion.
Yep.
There's like water droplets bouncing off the ship that are clearly too small to have been rapids.
We both noticed. Yep, we both
and it
noticed.
looks, even the ship, I've got the shot up right now, and even the ship looks like a miniature version of the big ship. Like the
Yes.
details just kind of aren't there on a full scale.
Right.
So we thought that, it's funny that Herzog chose to put this into the movie because perhaps he thinks that the shot looks so real that he can still get away with it. Or perhaps that he's
Maybe.
almost pulling the cloth away and sort of saying like, see,
Right.
I did trick people.
And
but
you know
I do
what
think
we've
that
got
it
to
is
do,
funny
I think what we've got to do, and I want to come back to this, when we do an episode on Fitzcarraldo, I want to double check to make sure that this scene is actually in the
in
film.
the picture.
It
Well,
could-
I mean, that's what's interesting is that it's on both the Wikipedia and on a website called, I think it was like shipmodelsinmovies.com or something.
like a database
And
of-
both of them reference Fitzcarraldo and say that in the movie, like not cutscenes on everything, but in the movie there is no credited model maker. There's no credited.
They hid the
person
fact.
For like a miniature effects artist or anything like that. There's nothing credited in the movie for that.
Right.
So
And
I do wonder.
I do.
Is it Herzog? Like, is Herzog aware that this shot is kind of clearly a miniature, and he's putting it in there to kind of play with this self-aware fact that he goes like, perhaps it's just all meta, and perhaps that the whole point of that being in there, and there also could be the aspect of I'm just reading way too much into this, but perhaps it is this meta thing on Herzog's part where he's like, I'm talking about how much Kinski makes up. I'm talking about how much Kinski lied about all of these events, and I'm putting this in there to kind of prove, hey, I also didn't tell the truth. I don't know. It could be that. It could also just be that Herzog thinks it's a cool shot that looks real enough to be put in there. I have no idea.
And I love both. Obviously, I lean towards I love the first explanation more. I hope that that's the one it is.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There's no way that we can know. Maybe one day, if and when we ever get Herzog on this podcast, we can ask him about it. But yeah, it's so funny that stuck out to both of us. I missed that on my first viewing. Or I just, or maybe I wasn't watching it with the kind of eye that I was watching it again this time. But I did miss it. I don't recall that ever sticking out to me. And I agree with you. I think it's fascinating because as soon as I realized that, I made a note. And right when we were talking, in preparation for this podcast, I was like, Colin, wait. Oh my gosh, you've got to pull the film back up. You got to go to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it's like 30 minutes.
30 minutes. And it is, I've got the exact timestamp. 31:03.
31:03. So everybody out there, go to 31:03.
It's on Prime Video if you got Amazon Prime Video.
But we've looked it up, and I think all signs point to that this is a model. It is a special effects shot, and I cannot tell you how many times I have heard Herzog talk about Fitzcarraldo and talk about the vital importance of the ship being real.
It's in the masterclass.
It's in the masterclass.
It's
in the masterclass that we have done episodes on previously. And so I agree with you, Colin.
And I also just want to clarify that this isn't us like going, look at Herzog, like we've outed Herzog as a guy who's a fake and a phony.
No.
I love this. Like, I think that this is just, if anything, it enhances the mythos
I agree.
of
I agree.
Herzog's filmography.
Yeah,
and
I
it's
agree.
one of those things that, again, and I think me and you went over this before as well, where it's like, if we were to ever ask him about it, it wouldn't be a gotcha moment.
No.
It would be more of a moment of, clarification in terms of like, you've gone on record saying how vital it was to make sure everything was real. Why is that in there? Like,
Yeah.
I wonder, I actually am more curious as to the point, and why is it in this one?
Yeah.
Because that is a shot that he would have had to look at and cut out. It's not like in Fitzcarraldo.
He
maybe
could have
there was
put any shot,
yeah.
right? He could have
Yeah.
put any number of shots from Fitzcarraldo where they actually absolutely positively used the real ship, because they
Yeah.
most certainly did use a real ship. That's no question. It was for just a very small, what we read was for some of the whitewater rapid scenes.
Yeah.
That a model was used for some.
I'd have to watch Fitzcarraldo again to see, and
Right.
it's easy to pinpoint. Like, it's not difficult to kind of make
it
note
stands
of.
out. It stands out. Yeah.
But
So-
no, I just think it's interesting that in this movie, where it is so much about these two almost opposite sides of the same coin,
Mhm.
telling different stories about the same events, telling or having different impressions of who was, even the moment when Herzog says,
that's our next podcast.
Let's throw
that's
Hitchcock
our next
in here.
That's our next podcast. We'll do Hitchcock.
But Herzog says, Kinski thought that I was insane and said that I was insane, but I'm not insane in the clinical sense. I'm very sane in the clinical sense. And it's like this funny little bit but then Herzog, of course, goes on to, I don't think Herzog ever actually explicitly says that Kinski was insane or psychopathic or anything, but he does kind of allude to his derangement.
I can't remember. He might. He might.
I don't think it's ever explicitly said.
Not medically. I don't know that he never goes so far as to say like he is medically,
he's clinically insane. Yeah.
But I think he says just about everything else under the book. Well, and I agree. I think it's interesting. And you're right. I mean, because of the context of Herzog is always. I mean, look, he's probably, I can hardly think of another director except for maybe somebody like Kevin Smith, and that's obviously a very radically different type of director. But I can't think of hardly any director who talks about their work as much as Herzog talks about his work. And I mean, let's think about it. This is a movie where Herzog he's made a movie about making movies. And half the footage in this are clips, shots from his other films, and then mixed in with his new interview footage. But I mean, he's constantly his Q&As, his masterclass. He's got a handful of numerous books. I mean, he spends and he's constantly speaking. I mean, he's constantly traveling the world, doing speaking engagements. If you go on YouTube, if you go almost anywhere and you just type in Herzog interview, I mean, you could fill the next month listening to Herzog talk about his films. So, I mean, and that's definitely a part of his whole kind of, you have to take all of that into consideration. It's all kind of a part of one. So he speaks so much about truth versus fact. And so we know this is an important part of his films. And so you're right. That's why this is fun. And we know that he makes up quotes. We know that he manipulates and stages interviews. We know that he even tells interviewees what to say sometimes. I mean, there's just about, he's done everything. But again, towards the pursuance of an ecstatic truth. And so I love it. I mean, that's how I'm going to take it, and I think it's fantastic.
Well, and even again, this element of competitiveness is so funny in it, where there's even a moment when Herzog is sitting with some of the native Peruvians that worked on Fitzcarraldo that were actually
Fitzcarraldo.
Okay. I can't remember which one it was, but they're sitting there beside him.
He does kind of mix in both kind of stories.
And they're similarly shot in locations. But he says, that the natives told me that they were never afraid of Kinski, but they were afraid of me because I was quiet and I was, and it's like this, again, it's this funny thing where it almost, intentionally or accidentally highlights this idea that they're so similar. There was just slight differences in the way that they compose themselves. And of course, beyond the accusations on Kinski, of course, we're not painting any of that on Herzog, but in terms of their temperament and stuff, that it's interesting to note that, or their interests and their interest in insanity and taking things incredibly far. That he tells the story of Kinski showing up for Aguirre with like 10 tons of alpine hiking equipment and to go and get this opening shot on a glacier, and it's like he wanted that real thing. But then he describes Kinski also as saying that he liked nature when he could control it, but there was no rain in his jungle, there were no mosquitoes in his jungle, there was no. And speaking of the jungle too, that it's a really interesting element where it's like, again, that this, you kind of get this double-sided coin where he says that Kinski never wandered more than 100 feet into the jungle. He wouldn't go in, and when he did, he brought a photographer to make sure that he captured this moment of him entering the jungle.
And that
Herzog, on the other hand, does talk about the jungle or the jungle, and in a way of saying that it's something that he feared, that he loathed, he didn't love it, and it was uncomfortable, but he also saw it as this great, incredible like temperament for chaos and murder. And I mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but I almost take it as like it's almost Herzog's, like the jungle is almost Herzog's metaphor for filmmaking.
Yeah.
Where he is like afraid of it, and he doesn't like the challenges. And when I say doesn't like, he almost secretly loves. Like he almost, it's like this, it's like an addiction. It's this it's this dangerous drug for him.
That which nourishes also destroys. And and that, of course, and that's, I think you're getting really close to what the sense that I kind of get from this film is that's kind of what Kinski is representing.
Yeah.
That's all of the parts of a whole of, whether that's the jungle, which Herzog continues to go back to. It's, he constantly shoots in extremely difficult and challenging locations. Whether it's Antarctica or the Amazon, he's working with extremely difficult people. Now, I haven't heard any stories of Herzog working with extremely difficult people outside of Kinski. So obviously he can operate without having to have such a loose cannon on set. But, certainly some of his greater films were made with Kinski, and he sought this person out. He knew how difficult it was to shoot with, and he still shot with him for 5 films. That's a lot of time.
It's important to note, too, that it's not like Aguirre was the only issue that where Herzog had issues with Kinski, that it was continuous. Like it wasn't, it wasn't a situation where it was like, okay, we had to work through our strife in Aguirre, and then the next ones were great, and we understood each other. No, they never did. Herzog says that even in Fitzcarraldo, that it was like, I think he says the last 2 days or something were the only times when Kinski seemed to sort of get his bearings together. They finished the movie, and that was it. And then, but on a very opposite note, in Cobra Verde, which actually was based on the Chatwin book, so kind of a little bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
That Kinski was so focused on directing his own movie and creating his own movie that there was this, Herzog describes it as this alien presence over Kinski that ruined his performance in the last few days of shooting, that he was so focused on this next movie, and that Herzog kind of cites that as the reason they never worked together again, despite Cobra Verde being in 1987 and there being, a few more years for them to work together, at least, because Kinski died in 1991, so there was certainly time for them to have made another movie, but considering they made 2 movies together in 1 year, but yeah, that was it. And I also, I ran this by, again, not to speculate or not to put words in Herzog's mouth or anything like that, but I would find it interesting to know if Herzog was almost like jaded and kind of personally hurt by the fact that Kinski was going off to kind of make his own thing, and it's kind of like
he wanted Herzog to direct that film.
Yeah,
and
he was
Herzog. Yeah, and Herzog read the script and said this is unshootable,
which perhaps it was, because it didn't do very well. It wasn't. It's not considered a very good movie.
Yeah.
So perhaps Herzog was correct in that. But no, it does. There is definitely a sombering when Herzog retells that story versus all the other ones. There's kind of a charm to the other stories about how, it was this crazy nuts thing. But then when he describes the ending of Cobra Verde and says that, and then we never worked together, there's this definite kind of, it almost feels personal, more personal, and kind of more affecting on Herzog than everything else.
And what we're seeing as he's telling this story is the last scene that they shot together. It's where Kinski is trying to pull this impossibly heavy boat into the ocean, and it's kind of like Don Quixote swinging at windmills, and his character dies there on the beach. And so I agree. I mean, it is it's interesting to speculate or to wonder why they didn't work again. I mean, Kinski was only alive for about 4 years after that. But like you said, they had made 2 films in 1 year at one point. So, and I think it's 78. So, certainly they could have made another film, but who knows? As we get older too, we're willing to put up with less and less crap.
That's a good point too.
At least I know I am, right? It's like,
and Herzog would have been, I guess, in his late 40s when doing
Right.
Cobra Verde. So
Right.
yeah,
I think
there
he was in
certainly
his
could just be a level of matureness that he was just kind of like, all right,
just tired.
I'm done
Yeah.
with this. Yeah.
I'm done with this. Yeah.
And I also think it's, because it's also not a situation where Kinski was only like this with Herzog. There's the famous story of him and getting offered the part for Tote in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right.
And then he responded to Spielberg by saying, this is an actual quote, this script is a yawn-making, boring pile of shit and moronically shitty. So, of course, I love Raiders. Raiders is a great movie.
Me too.
But I
me
do
too.
think it's hilarious that, he was certainly not one to mince words.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
it wasn't to say, I can't, honestly, I almost wish he did take that role just to hear and see how differently the production of Raiders would have gone with Kinski there.
I mean, I don't
Raiders
even know
was
if he would have
famously
survived.
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
yeah.
even know if Spielberg would have put up with that.
No,
crap.
I know. Raiders was a famously like really well done production, like that. There were very few issues. That it was really smooth, under budget, under schedule, or ahead of schedule. So I wonder if Kinski was there, what that difference would have made in that movie. Kind of hilarious.
It's a fun thing to think about, no question.
Yeah.
The original performance, and I forget the actor's name, did an extraordinary job, by the way.
But who's an American? He wasn't even a German. But
it is a super fun thing to think about. I mean, and just to go back a little bit to this, I mean, well, actually, you know what? I actually want to bring up something different. I want to talk because this is something that I think about, as I watch this film. And as I, hear the stories, not just, from Herzog telling them here in this film, but, they're throughout. I mean, it's like so part and parcel to the mythology of Herzog as a director. How difficult it was to work with Kinski and how violent that relationship was. I can't help but to think, and I'm curious to have a conversation with you about this and see what you think. What would that mean for today? And what would that mean for us, for you and I, personally as filmmakers? I think, obviously, we're in 2021 right now. We have gone through like the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
There have been
a lot more accountability on sets.
A lot more accountability on
and
sets.
And just in businesses in general.
And just, right. And absolutely appropriately so.
Yeah.
Where,
a lot of
people, whatever the kind of abuse it is that, and especially on film sets, where there's often huge, discrepancies in power potentially between, gatekeepers and, people who are desperate for work. But, what do you think? So, here we have, Herzog, Kinski, he's screaming and yelling at other crew. He's disrespectful to numerous people on set.
Yeah.
Now, not to everybody, because like I said, we have other people here who say that he was fantastic. But clearly, I mean, he was disrespectful and violent to Herzog.
And tried to get camera operators fired.
So, and it's undeniable that the final product is great. Undeniable, right? So what do you think? Like, how does that calculus go in your head? What would you do today? I'm just curious. Like,
I mean, I've never had, I would say the most closest I've ever had to a difficult actor or a Kinski-like actor was when I was at a film camp when I was like 13.
Wait. I have to stop you. Okay, I'm so sorry, but hold on for a minute. Just hold on for a minute. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait. I need to draw this out. So let's imagine a 13-year-old Cullen. So this is just
back when I also spoke like Herzog all the time too.
This is just 2 years ago for you. So
yeah, exactly.
No. Sorry, I'm so sorry. So it's like, so you're 13, and when you're 13, what is that, like sixth grade? Is that about sixth grade? Something.
The seventh. I would have been going into, or might have just finished seventh grade.
So you're middle school. You're middle school. So here's what I'm imagining. I'm just imagining like Director Cullen. You've got your megaphone. You've got your you're like directors.
Little Spielberg is what they used to call me.
You've got little Spielberg, and you've got like your safari vest on with and you've got your
little hat. Yeah,
all the yep. And I can just imagine like a fellow 13-year-old with like wild blonde hair, like shooting out in all directions, like screaming at you in German,
And I've got a mustache at that point too.
You've got a
I've
full
got Herzog's
mustache.
big
Yep,
mustache.
you've got a Herzogian mustache, and and there's like a 13-year-old Kinski over there screaming, and like, oh my god. Okay.
Well, what's funny about this though is, and it's not actually all that inaccurate. I won't mention the kid's name.
Of course,
God forbid he watches, but we never got along. I always hated him.
Yeah,
I'll put it that way.
So sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. But it is a
picture.
very funny story. Because
Sorry. Please tell it.
We would be doing scenes or shots, and it was like everyone would have a role in the movie. The film camp was it was a great experience for me growing up because it was run like a real set. We had sound recorders, we had people on boom, we had people. It was very much like,
I would have loved to do that at that age. Yeah, awesome.
It wasn't just going out with a cell phone. We had interchange, like we had DSLRs,
real gear,
so things like that. And we had to do reshoots. And we were doing reshoots this is a very specific story. We were doing reshoots in a different location than the original scene was shot, but the reshoots were all close-ups of just like elements, just basically cut-ins, and inserts. And but he was saying like, I'm not going to do this because we're not in the same location. It's going to look stupid, and everyone's going to know that we filmed this in the same location. And I've actually, not that maybe I'm being a little bit hurt like Herzog here. I've always been quite calm tempered. Like it takes a lot for me to lose my temper and stuff like that. I'm quite cool, calm, and
pretty
collected.
even.
Is
Yeah.
Easy way to describe it. But I just remember kind of having to like work with this kid who was the same age as me and just sort of go like, will you just shut up and do the scene? Because like, it's not going to make a difference. Nobody's going to yell at us because the wall is slightly a different shade.
That's hysterical that you say that, because I mean, that was, one of the people interviewed in this film was a photographer, and I think his name is Beat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing
who's taken a lot of the famous photos that Herzog was used for his posters and stuff.
Which are highlighted in this film for sure. But this photographer, Beat Presser, is there, and he's actually kind of telling a little bit of the stories about how, okay, so yes, Kinski was off the rails, and he was inappropriately violent, and his mood swings were just erratic and happened just boom, he could turn on a dime. But when it came to whatever it was that he got mad at, it was like he was right.
There was always a thing.
There was like, and he was right. There was like an issue with the lighting. There's an issue with the sound. There's
someone was talking in the
there's
background.
Somebody, there's like 30 people standing around, but somehow he can pick out the one person who's talking 30 feet away or something. But he was always right. It was like he was extremely exacting. So I'm just imagining, this guy was just
that is exacting. Interesting though, because that does contradict a little bit of what Herzog said earlier, which is when he describes that he didn't know his lines, so that he would pick it. So then he picks out the camera operator and says he smirked middle of the take, and I couldn't remember my line because of that. And sure. Herzog pretty much alludes to the fact that no, the camera operator didn't smirk, but he's looking for an excuse to make himself. So I wonder, and of course Herzog doesn't push back on the photographer saying that. Herzog more so agrees with him in that instance, but it does technically contradict the story that Herzog told earlier, which is that it's likely
all kind of right. It's like
exactly.
It's all kind of part of this. That of course, there's not just one, and that's what makes these things so interesting. Is that this is Herzog's truth. But there is no objective truth. Kinski would have his truth. Yeah. Herzog has his truth. His photographer has his truth. And so that's where every artist subject is a mirror, where we kind of see ourselves, and in the exploration of that subject and the communication of our viewpoint about it, we're basically revealing ourselves. That's what makes art so wonderful to me. And so that's where this film is really a film about Herzog. It's really a film about him as a filmmaker, and often in very literal ways, right? I mean, it's Herzog on camera talking about his experiences making films, his challenges. But
I do want to jump back to what you said earlier though about like what would you do?
So let's go back to that. So let's go back to that.
That was
because this is important. This is important, I think.
So that's why I specified that the only time I've ever had difficulty with an actor to that level was that.
Let's bring ourselves today. Let's bring ourselves. You're on a significant production. Let's say like
something like this happens.
I mean, would you make the trade off? And
I don't think I would.
Should yeah.
I really. I guess the easiest way to put it is that I have a very low tolerance for bullshit. And clearly Herzog doesn't. Clearly Herzog was able to put up with a lot to get his movie made. But no, I would. if I was Herzog um, and my lead actor in the middle of the Peruvian Amazon decided that he was going to walk off set, I wouldn't have been like, I'm going to kill you. I would have been like, okay, go.
Yeah.
Scripts changed. Your character died. Fell in the water, and that's the story. And then
Fell
now
in the
we're
water.
and so like and I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous. It sounds like you couldn't.
No, but
rewrite,
I understand. But you wouldn't put up with it, is what you're saying. You'd
no,
find
I would
a way to
I would
work
say
around
go.
Yeah.
I don't need that. And it was the same thing then when I was doing that thing when I was 13, where I was like, I was ready to be like, I only need your hands. You can go. I can fill in for your hands.
Sure.
So it was very like I really don't have.
I mean, you're an international
I have a lot of
model anyway.
Yeah,
so
exactly. That's these beautiful nails don't. They have got not a lot of work through COVID, but no, I think it's interesting that that Herzog did put up with that, and I wonder if Herzog would put up with it with other people, or if it was just
or if he would do it now.
Because there is certainly a specialty. I know we I want to kind of talk a little bit about in relation to this. Fitzcarraldo originally, of course, was starring Jason Robards and Mick Jagger and
of
Mick
the
Jagger,
Rolling Stones.
Yeah, and neither of them could. Continue
Jason
the movie,
got sick.
so they had to.
Robards got sick.
Yeah, they had to scrap the, and so Mick Jagger's character was just scrapped entirely, taken out of the movie.
Which is interesting to note that Herzog. So I am a Rolling Stones fan. So for anybody who's a Rolling Stones fan out there, it's interesting to note that at least according to Herzog, he did not replace Mick Jagger because he felt like his performance was outstanding, and that he was unable to replace that character with another actor. And Mick had to bail out because of scheduling conflicts. There was either recording or touring going on. And of course, when Robards got sick...
I think it was a tour. I think it was they were going on a tour,
Yeah, likely going on a tour. And but they shot, as far as I understand, I mean, like maybe 2/3 or... I mean, they shot...
Yeah, they shot a lot of it. Yeah. And then... but then Herzog... So then at that point, Herzog says that he was looking at other actors and even... So John... Or... what's his name?
I love what's his name.
Why am I forgetting his name?
What's his name is
great actor of what's his name? Jack Nicholson. John Nicholson. Why was I thinking John Nicholson? Jack Nicholson. I've met Jack Nicholson too.
Jack Nicholson's very little known brother, John.
In fact, Jack Nicholson was the actor I was dealing with when I was 13. But
whoa, that's amazing.
You look at and Herzog.
So he was
says
60.
That,
so you were 13,
yes,
and you were directing. You were directing with a 60-year-old Jack. Because isn't he like 85 now? I mean, he's got to be quite old. Yeah.
But Herzog even considered doing it himself and playing Fitzcarraldo himself. But eventually Kinski was like, I knew that I was supposed to play it. But you look at the point of my long ramblings here. You look at the shot of Jason Robards playing Fitzcarraldo on top of the church tower, ringing a bell and screaming, "I need an opera!" and
which Herzog has in this film, right? So yes, there is a section where Herzog shows the original footage,
which is really interesting.
It is of Mick Jagger and Jason Robards. There's this. He shows the scene where they're up in the church tower, and they're saying Fitzcarraldo saying, "Give me my opera house. I'm shutting the church down until you give me my opera house." Right.
And so you look at that, but then it cuts to pretty much immediately, like it's pretty much just a cut from scene to scene. Cuts to Kinski doing the exact same scene, and there is such an energy with him. There's this insane
night and day
pulling in magnetic performance by him, and so I can understand. I can totally kind of empathize with Herzog in that way, where it's like he definitely was a special actor in that way.
He was definitely special.
He also, again, Herzog also says that he enjoyed Mick Jagger and Robards separately. He says that that they were fine actors, but it's just there is this, and here Herzog himself also never even makes that claim in the movie, where he says that. He doesn't even say that. He doesn't say that, like, look at the difference between the two performances. No. He just puts them beside each other.
He lets the images speak for themselves, I think. But it's also, I just want to point out, too, because I'm always questioning. Questioning, right? It is entirely feasible. And frankly, I would do this if I were the filmmaker.
Yeah.
It's entirely feasible that Herzog took the worst take of Robards to emphasize the contrast between the take from the finished film of Kinski.
Yeah.
Because this is right. That would be the quote unquote truth versus fact. The truth is Kinski was the only one for the job, and the fates proved it. But look how compare Robards to Kinski. So now I'm not saying Herzog did that. I have no proof that he did that, but I'm saying that in the context of everything we know about Herzog, I've got to kind of assume, I lean towards that, that's very much a possibility, right?
Yeah,
So,
totally.
which would just, it just kind of like falls in line with so much of what he did. But I want to go back to, because I want to talk a little bit about that, about what I think I might do.
Yeah, yeah.
If, I think, the answer for me is pretty simple. Now when I was younger, I think that I would have been much more, I think, I would have said all that matters is the film. And I know Herzog has said this numerous times over
Yeah, that
and
this
over
film
and
is more
over.
important than our bodies, our
The
lives.
film
yeah.
is more important, and I do have to say, and for purists out there, for you true believers, for you soldiers of cinema who would die on the battlefield, on the front lines of film, I do have to say right here and now that I would not sacrifice somebody's well-being. I wouldn't sacrifice
No.
my own, and I wouldn't, to the best of my ability, I would not put anyone in any kind of significant harm's way, certainly not conscientiously, and I would definitely not tolerate an actor or a crew person or anybody else treating somebody unprofessionally on my set,
Yeah.
much less treat people the way Herzog was, allowed Kinski. Frankly, because he did, right? Herzog was the director. Herzog is ultimately responsible. So there is this moral, ethical question. There really is. And for me, I would never make, I can't imagine that I would make, right? I guess never say never, and you never know what you would do unless you're in a certain situation. To be fair,
Well, it's also important to note too that Herzog on Fitzcarraldo was the producer as well. So it's not a situation where some producer was like, this guy has to be in it.
Correct. Herzog had full control. He could have. Now I don't know what their contractual agreement is. Maybe but the bottom line is, for the most part, we can assume that Herzog had control, and he could have let Kinski go. But it's just not worth it for me. Life is too short, and I love film, and film is wonderful, but film is not life. There's a lot of things in life that are important, and people's well-being is more important to me at this stage of my life, at this stage of my career, and I would not, because there's always another option. You may think there's not another option. You may feel like, oh my God, there's nobody who could perform. There's just no way. And I don't think that way. I don't think that there's only one person that could do a job. There's only one Kinski, yes. But there could have been a successful, effective film with another actor somehow. There's just no way that I can believe that only one person could have done it. I just don't buy that. May have been very difficult, may have been hard to do, may have taken 5 more years to find that person. It could have been extreme difficulties and challenges with that. But at the same time, as much as I say that, I wouldn't do this. I certainly can understand, and I certainly did think this way more when I was younger, that what survives on film is something that lasts forever. And, these temporary fleeting challenges and insults that we face in the making of it are, at the end of the day, small compared to, this like film, this art that lasts forever. But just, for me, I might be, maybe I can put up with some, right? If I choose to put up with somebody who's insulting me and berating me and treating me poorly, that's one thing. But if you have crew that are working there, if you have other actors that are working there, and they don't have the choice, they didn't make the choice, they didn't say, okay, I accept being treated
especially
this way.
The indigenous people.
Anybody,
there, too,
anybody. When, they don't have the choice, right? You're creating an unsafe working environment for people. That's unacceptable on multiple levels. It's unacceptable legally. It's unacceptable morally.
We know in Fitzcarraldo, there's an entire section on the Wikipedia page for deaths, injuries, and accusations of exploitation.
And that's a whole right. And
Yeah.
that is a whole other discussion. And it might warrant down the road, an episode all in and of itself, not just for the film
about
Fitzcarraldo, but just
the lengths of
right. But
which
about
filmmakers take their work. Yeah.
And Herzog is definitely one of the, and he will say time and time again that he's very safe, that he, does not take extra risk just to take them. And I certainly think that he believes that, and I think that in some ways that's true. But I think that his philosophy of filmmaking doesn't leave him a lot of choices when it comes to things, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so in his mind, he's kind of like, well, I have to make the film, and I can't find anybody else to make it than Kinski, so I will make it with Kinski. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the calculus that goes on. He's like, well, it's vital for me to pull a ship over a mountain, so
And I mean, I guess to compare again, because the whole thing is like, what would we do? What
yeah,
versus our careers and stuff.
yeah.
I mean, again, I had a situation where I was doing a Western, and the lead actor in the Western that I had, the only person that was willing to do it, because it wasn't paid, it was just me and some friends. The only person that was willing to do it had braces. And most of the movie he doesn't speak, so it wasn't an issue. But there is a dialogue moment at the end, and you can see, I did my best to hide them. But also at the end of the day, I was like,
You're
am
young.
I going to not make the movie because somebody,
Sure.
one of the actors braces? Am I going to go, okay, can't be done?
Wait,
am I just going to go out and make the movie?
Cullen, I can't. You give me such great ideas. So I'm imagining the scene. Okay, imagine with me. Imagine with me. Imagine with me. Where it's you've got Clint Eastwood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say circa like when was Good, Bad, and the Ugly?
Like 67, 68.
68. And he's wearing his like trademark hat and the poncho and everything, and he's got the stubble, and he's like, and you see him, he's like, we have like
cigar in his mouth.
Well, right. Well, we see him, we come in and we're like maybe like a close up on the horse, or like a spurs, and we move up, and we're slowly revealing the character on the horse, and maybe we see like a match like strike, the heel of his boot while we're down there, and we follow the match up, we're panning up, we're coming up. And he's got one of those cigarillos in his mouth, and he lights it. It's like Clint Eastwood, like at his most badass. And he removes the cigarillo from his mouth, and he has braces.
Yeah, I mean, it's also funny because that friend of mine, he is older than he's 5 or 6 years older than me, so he's much older. And originally, the reason that he was cast, and the reason it wasn't an issue, he wasn't originally supposed to speak. The script just changed so much through the production of that movie that the ending wound up having him speak a few lines, and that's where, of course, you can see the braces.
But that's where but you can always, and that's where it's like I think that but what you're speaking to, it seems like we're off topic, but I think what you're saying is that look, film art is always a compromise, and there is no such thing as some kind of ideological purity when it comes to filmmaking, and it's okay to compromise, and it's certainly okay to take people's welfare and treatment into account
and take them seriously,
and take so exactly. And
so I guess the point of that, the whole braces thing, is just to say I'm okay putting up with that for a movie, and it's like if that I don't really care. The movie, I'm not going to cancel the movie because something like that. But I wouldn't, if that actor who has the braces, who, of course I'm good friends with, so he's not like that. But if he was to act like Kinski, or even like a tenth of the way like Kinski during that production, then I wouldn't. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have done it then. I wouldn't have put up with that.
And let's be realistic too. Herzog hasn't done that for 30 years, and he's not worked with somebody like that for 30 years. And the fact of the matter is that in today's day and age, there's no way in a million years you're going to get away with that from a legal perspective. It's just not going to happen. So hopefully, there are more pressures in place to keep people from acting like that to begin with, and I think that's a good thing. So, wow. Well.
That was a great episode.
On that note, it's
very interesting. More about filmmaking. I think that much like the movie, though, but it's like this is sort of more about a filmmaking kind of angle than just the movie itself. So.
Which I feel like you can categorize so many of his films kind of in a strange way as that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I really, as always, I completely enjoyed this conversation. It was a blast covering this film. I hadn't seen it in a long time. And it was fantastic revisiting this, and then kind of even pulling some of the issues that that this film brings up, and kind of bringing them into the modern day and discussing them as as to how they may affect our own filmmaking or how we might deal with them ourselves. I hope other people have found that to be interesting. So I've really enjoyed it. As always, Cullen, thank you so much for hanging out with me here for the
thanks
past
for having
hour.
me along.
And until next time, everybody, we'll catch you on the flip side.